As we get into the fall here for the next couple of months, we're going to be starting a new series here on Sunday mornings and spending some time looking at the Psalms of Ascents. And you might be saying, well, what are those? And they are not, a few things they're not the Psalms of incense. Despite what we sang earlier, we're not that kind of church. Incense in Revelation represented the prayers of the saints rising before the throne, and we definitely believe in that, but we don't usually have the actual clouds around here. It's also not Psalms intense. That's singing while camping. Nor is it the Palms of Ascents. That's just agreeable trees. But it is the Psalms of Ascents, the songs of going up. And sorry for subjecting you to all those dad jokes. I got so messed up with all of that, Tim even pointed out that I misspelled it the last time here. I had the wrong ascents on my notes. But these are Psalms, as it says on the screens there. They're Psalms 120 to 134 that all have this title at the beginning of each psalm in that series. And Psalms 135 to 137 are often added to those psalms as a collection in Jewish worship. But why this title? Why Psalms of Ascents? Well, some people have made a connection with the final 15 steps that led up to the temple in Old Testament times and even in the beginning of New Testament times. Those steps are still there today. Because of all of the changes that have happened there, they don't really go anywhere at the moment. There's no opening that they lead to. But people who refer to it in this way suggest that these were songs that the Levites, the worship leaders, would have sung on each of these 15 steps as part of worship or as part of a procession going into the temple. But the most common understanding of these psalms is that they were songs that were sung by people traveling to Jerusalem. Because Jewish people have always spoken about going up to Jerusalem. If you look through your Bible, most of the time when it talks about going to Jerusalem, it talks about people going up. And well, that's because Jerusalem, compared to the surrounding area, is pretty high. The main road into Jerusalem, as you can see there, came from Jericho, which was next to the Jordan River. Jericho is about 720 feet below sea level. It's one of the, if not the lowest city on earth. Jerusalem is about 2,450 feet above sea level. So going from Jericho to Jerusalem is a climb of more than 3,000 feet in just 20 miles. It's a steep road. So that's why people would go up to Jerusalem, or why they would say they went up to Jerusalem. But why was it that people would go there? What was the point of going up to Jerusalem? Festivals. Yeah, there were certain festivals during the year that the people were commanded to come before the Lord, to come to Jerusalem. Why else would people go to Jerusalem? For worship, yes. To go there before the temple, the place where God had placed his name, and to worship him. Probably these psalms were written in different contexts. Some of them, we're told, were written by David, one of them by Solomon. Others are anonymous. But they were probably collected together sometime after the exile of Judah in the 500s BC. They also then reflect not just going up to Jerusalem to worship, not just going up for the festivals, but going up to Jerusalem as a return from exile after 70 years in captivity. Jesus probably sang these songs as he went up to Jerusalem to celebrate the festivals. And today, these songs can still help us. They can help us to rise above our circumstances in worship as they refocus our hearts and our minds toward God. And so over the next several weeks, I'd like us to consider these psalms. We'll be taking them in different groupings to consider how they help us to see ourselves in relationship to God, to see ourselves as watched, chosen, restored, blessed, patient, unified, and loved. And today we're just starting off. We're starting with Psalms 120 and 121, and what it means for us to see ourselves as watched by God. So I'd like to start with Psalm 120 first, and then we'll turn to a Psalm 121 in a moment. And as we read this one, I would, as you're able, I invite you to stand as we open God's Word together. Psalm 120, a song of ascents. I call on the Lord in my distress, and he answers me. Save me, Lord, from lying lips and from deceitful tongues. What will he do to you, and what more besides, you deceitful tongue? He will punish you with a warrior's sharp arrows, with burning coals of the broom bush. Woe to me that I dwell in Meshech, that I live among the tents of Kedar. Too long have I lived among those who hate peace. I am for peace, but when I speak, they are for war. May God add his blessing to this word. Please be seated. I don't know what you were thinking as I read that, but it kind of seems like an odd start to the collection, doesn't it? This is what people sing as they're going up to Jerusalem to celebrate before God, and it's talking about being in distress. The psalmist says that he's facing slander and deceit, probably in the middle of an election season or something. But he says he is a man of peace. Literally, the Hebrew says, I peace. But he lives among a culture of violence. He mentions these different places. Meshech was an ancient kingdom at the southeast of the Black Sea. In fact, actually, the legend of King Midas with the golden touch is connected with that kingdom up there. Kedar were nomadic tribes who lived in the desert of the Arabian Peninsula. And so it seems that what the psalmist is saying is basically, just as sometimes we talk about from the east to the west, he's saying from the north to the south, representing all of the world outside of Israel. The psalmist is living outside of the land, living among the Gentiles, living in exile. The words for dwell and live that he uses here indicate something that isn't his permanent home. He might have a house, but he's just there temporarily. He's sojourning there. I think this is an important start to this collection as we think about this, because it reminds us that we can only go up when we know that we're down. Often, I think all too often, we only seek God when we know we're at a low point. Too often, wealth or pleasure dull our desire to seek God, don't they? When we feel self-sufficient, we don't realize how desperately we need him. And actually, it's pretty similar to what I see as the other lesson from this psalm here, that we only long for our true home when we know we're strangers in this one. God had told Israel time and time again to care for the foreigner, the alien, the immigrant, the refugee in their midst, because they knew what it was like. They had been slaves in Egypt. They had been exiles in Babylon. And the church is called to do the same, because we are strangers and aliens in this world too. Peter writes, once you were not a people, but now you are the people of God. Once you had not received mercy, but now you have received mercy. Dear friends, I urge you, as foreigners and exiles, to abstain from sinful desires which wage war against your soul. Live such good lives among the pagans, that though they accuse you of doing wrong, they may see your good deeds and glorify God on the day he visits us. He says, we have become the people of God, but that means that we are foreigners and exiles in this world. But that gives us a particular opportunity to glorify God. One of the things that Ginger and I noticed during the 3 years that we spent in China was the number of opportunities that we had to share with our students about the hope that we had. And it was because we were different. We looked different than our students, but we also acted different than our students. We reacted to things differently than they expected. And it gave us an opportunity to share about the reason for the hope that was within us. And that reminds me that the church has been often at its most hypocritical and has most damaged the gospel message when the church has sought worldly power and influence. But the church has been at its most authentic and its most influential when being a Christian was a contrast to the culture around, even to the point of persecution. Because since we have received mercy, we can show mercy to those around us, even and especially when they don't agree with us, even and especially when they falsely accuse us of doing wrong or believing wrong, even and especially when we ache with that longing for our true home, because we know we are foreigners and exiles in this one. So there's a reason that this collection starts with Psalm 120. Because it's only when we feel that longing that we can truly begin to sing these songs of ascents. And that cry for salvation, deliverance, and peace in Psalm 120 actually continues into Psalm 121. The psalmist writes in a song of ascents, I lift up my eyes to the mountains. Where does my help come from? My help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. He will not let your foot slip. He who watches over you will not slumber. Indeed, he who watches over Israel will neither slumber nor sleep. The Lord watches over you. The Lord is your shade at your right hand. The sun will not harm you by day, nor the moon by night. The Lord will keep you from all harm. He will watch over your life. The Lord will watch over your coming and going, both now and forevermore. I lift up my eyes to the mountains. That road, that Jericho road to Jerusalem, was really just a path, like a lot of roads in the ancient world, but it went through some really deep ravines. You can still walk that road today along more or less its original route. It was a road of some danger. So lifting up your eyes to the mountains could be looking around, wondering what's going to happen, looking for the danger around. Those crags and hidden places above were great places for robbers to hide and drop down on unsuspecting travelers. In fact, this is the road that was the setting of Jesus' parable of the Good Samaritan, when he was jumped by bandits and left for dead. But also, looking up to the mountains can represent looking to false help. Mountains in Israel and in a lot of other places were the sites of what were known as high places. Israel borrowed practices from their neighbors, worshiping God in inappropriate ways he had not told them to. But they also worshipped other gods on those high places, at those shrines on the mountaintops. In 2 Kings, we read, the people of Israel did secretly against the Lord their God things that were not right. They built for themselves high places in all their towns, from watchtower to fortified city. They set up for themselves pillars and asherim on every high hill and under every green tree. And there they made offerings on all the high places, as the nations did whom the Lord carried away before them. And they did wicked things, provoking the Lord to anger, and they served idols, of which the Lord had said to them, "You shall not do this." So we can look up to the mountains just looking for the danger that we fear is there, but we can look up to the mountains, and we can do that looking to false helps. We can look to money or possessions or power. In this season, it's striking to me that both parties are basically casting this election as so important for saving America, whichever way that is. But we are so tempted to put our trust in creation instead of in the Creator. We can put our trust in a false gospel, watering down the truth of it until it becomes acceptable and harmless, not standing in the way of what we want to do. But then it's just meaningless, powerless to save or to transform. Or we try to use the gospel as a bludgeon and hit people over the head with it to get our own way. We can look to false helps, or we can lift our eyes to the true source of our help. And that's what the singers of this psalm make clear, that they are looking up to the end of their journey, to Jerusalem, to the temple where God's name dwelled. My help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. But this, I think, brings up some important questions. Because we can look to the mountains, we can look to the maker of heaven and earth, but does he really look back? Does he really watch us? And if he does, how does he watch us? Why does he watch us? So first, does God watch? I think a lot of people today think of God as distant. Maybe there's a God out there somewhere, but he doesn't really see, he doesn't really care what's happening on earth. And like the people of Israel, we can think that we can do things secretly against God. Because this isn't a new idea. Psalm 94 goes right to the heart of this. The writer says, "They pour out arrogant words. All the evildoers are full of boasting. They crush your people, Lord. They oppress your inheritance. They slay the widow and the foreigner. They murder the fatherless. They say, 'The Lord does not see. The God of Jacob takes no notice.' Take notice, you senseless ones among the people. You fools, when will you become wise? Does he who fashioned the ear not hear? Does he who formed the eye not see?" God made everything, and he still sees everything. Israel thought their sins were secret, but God saw. He does not slumber or sleep. But, then we can find ourselves asking, well, God might watch, but does he watch but not act? We look around and we can very easily see evil prosper. We see people who turn away from God, and they seem to be doing just fine. We see oppression and injustice running rampant. In each of our lives, we feel the effects of sin and suffering, and we wonder, God, why aren't you doing something about it? Why aren't you acting? It's just like what we saw in Habakkuk a few months ago. As the prophet cried out, "How long, Lord, must I call for help, but you do not listen? Or cry out to you, violence, but you do not save? Why do you make me look at injustice? Why do you tolerate wrongdoing?" But the writer of Psalm 120 reminds us we need to keep seeking God in the midst of our troubles. He sees, and He will act. It may not be in our timing or our ways. The longer I live, the more I find that it's usually not in my timing or my ways. But God will do what is right and what is just. You know, there's a flip side to that. Sometimes we find that our problem isn't so much that we feel that God is watching too little, but we feel like God is watching us too much. Have you ever felt that way? Does God just watch me to test and punish me? A lot of people resent God because they feel like He's just watching them to catch them, just waiting to smack them down. It's like the old Far Side cartoon where God has His finger right over the smite button, just waiting. You know, you've heard of Job. Job expressed this very idea, his complaint, when he was at his lowest point. He said, "What is man that you make so much of him, and that you set your heart on him?" It's kind of a sarcastic echo of Psalm 8 in that one. That you visit him every morning and test him every moment. How long will you not look away from me, nor leave me alone till I swallow my spit? If I sin, what do I do to you, you watcher of mankind? Why have you made me your mark? Why have I become a burden to you? Why do you not pardon my transgression and take away my iniquity? And there's often a contradiction in this. We think, God, why don't you bring justice to the wicked? And at the same time, we wonder, God, why don't you look the other way so I can do what I want? Why don't you just leave me alone instead of testing me, instead of punishing me? You know, God doesn't have His finger just over the smite button. He isn't watching us just to punish us. As the people of Israel sang Psalm 121, they reminded themselves that God is watching over us for our good. He cares for us. He doesn't slumber or sleep. He is our help. God doesn't just watch. He's not just looking for that chance to smack us. He watches over us in caring love, to strengthen us, to fill us with the peace of His presence, even now. And I realize it can seem like there's a problem here. The psalm says God will keep us from all harm. So why was the writer in such distress in Psalm 120? Why was he facing slander and violence? Well, you know, the message of the whole of the Bible is that we live in a broken world. We broke it. Because of that, we face trouble and distress, violence and pain. But the message of the gospel is that Jesus came to earth. He climbed that road to Jerusalem. And on a hill outside the city, He took on Himself the penalty of your sin and mine, so that we could be restored to Him today. To Job's complaints, Jesus says, I have pardoned your transgressions. I have taken away your iniquity. We just have to lift our eyes to accept His gift to us, the gift of restoring what we most need, a restoration of our relationship to our Creator. And with that relationship restored, we can know His presence through this journey of life. We can know that restoration in the middle of all of the trials of this broken world. He is with us, delivering, strengthening, comforting, giving us the peace that only He can give. And in fact, I realized as we were singing that song, this morning. Thou burning sun with golden beam, thou silver moon with softer gleam. It's like what is said in the psalm. The sun will not harm you by day, or the moon by night. In fact, as the song calls on them, oh, praise him. Even the trials that we face can lead to his praise, because he works all things to the good. And the psalmist points us to a bigger picture when he says at the end that God will watch over our coming and going both now and forevermore. There's a longer view in mind here. We see this in the book of Hebrews, at the end of what's often known as the Hall of Faith, all of these great faithful ones in the Old Testament. The writer says this: all these people were still living by faith when they died. They did not receive the things promised. They only saw them and welcomed them from a distance, admitting that they were foreigners and strangers on earth. People who say such things show that they are looking for a country of their own. If they had been thinking of the country they had left, they would have had opportunity to return. Instead, they were longing for a better country, a heavenly one. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them. We are all foreigners and strangers in this world. And just like those before us, we will experience pain and hurt and struggles, the heat of the day and the chill of the night. And I'm sure a lot of you are feeling that this morning. But like those who went before us, we are waiting for a better country. It occurred to me something interesting about the road to Jerusalem. Don't know if you can see it on that elevation map there. Between Jericho and Jerusalem is the Mount of Olives. It's about 150 feet higher than Jerusalem. You know what that means? The whole journey, the whole way up that road, people returning to Jerusalem would never be able to see their destination. Even if they had a clear view in the right direction, it was always just over that mountain until they got to the summit. And the whole city of Jerusalem stretched out before them, the temple shining in the sun. So I thought about this, and I realized that this is a very dangerous thing to do on the day of the Browns opener. But I'm originally from Western Pennsylvania, and near Pittsburgh. Have any of you ever driven into Pittsburgh from the southwest through the Fort Pitt Tunnel? Well, I found a video that's shortening the tunnel just a little bit, but this is what it's like. It's one of the most dramatic entrances to any city that I've ever experienced. I'm not saying Pittsburgh is heaven. Far from it. But I think that just gives us a picture. The Lord, the maker of heaven and earth, has prepared a country just over the mountain. He's prepared it for you and for me, for all who have accepted his invitation. And we can be citizens of that country even now, even in our exile. So as you walk this road, lift your eyes to the mountains. Not to the danger, not to your troubles, not to false helps that only try to cover it up or even make it worse. Look to the Lord, your Maker, your Helper, who loves you. And experience His loving watchfulness over your life until that day that we finally lift up our eyes and see that city before us. Until we finally come